Good afternoon. It's great to be back at home and learning with you on a Thursday. For me, it's 6 p.m. Pacific. And I've been on the East Coast the last few days, but it's great to be home. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Thursday? Yehud in South Carolina, Nancy in North Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Stephen in New Hampshire, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bella in Florida, Elvis in New York, Shandor in the Bronx, Melissa in Great Neck, Lorraine in Texas, Joe in the Inland Empire, Marjorie Holler in Georgia. So glad you're here. I'll get to you in a moment. Ella saying Shalom Chaim in Florida. And thank you everybody who says their names and where they're checking in from at the top. And I can, first of all, this little roll call that we do at the top of every class, it just warms my heart. Really feels like we're all in it together. But also, when you comment and like and share, it just helps our learning become accessible to more people, right? The more engagement there is, the more the algorithm shows it to other people. And who knows who's going to bump into our class and become an accidental Talmudist like us. Today's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by our very own Marjorie Holler. It's such a beautiful dedication in honor of Sal and Nina, whose teachings fill my soul and feed my longing for the peace of Hashem. Amen. So beautiful. Marjorie, thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world by donating to our nonprofit. May God shower you and all your loved ones with blessings, and we say Amen. Our daf today is page Chaf base, page 22. We got a little bit of a head start yesterday. So we're on page 22 here in Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud. We're working our way through chapter 2. Today completing Mishna number 3. And now the Mishnas are going to get a little bit short and quick. So we're going to cover several Mishnas today. And we'll actually be set up to do a double daf tomorrow without even really lengthening the class. It's a perfect time for us to get caught up since we missed a couple of classes earlier this week. Okay. Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 2 was all about... I read so many things, and then it's just not at the tip of my tongue. Right, but it's this idea of sort of protective trade practices, and whether if you set up a business, first of all, if you set up a business in a residential neighborhood, can your neighbors complain and say, hey, this is a residential neighborhood, you can't have a business here? For certain kinds of businesses, yes, but if you're going to open an elementary school in your house to teach children Torah, then no, your neighbors cannot object. And once we started with that, we also said, well, what if you set up a knife sharpening business? That's going to make a lot of noise. Can you do that in your house? Probably yes. But can you, if your neighbor has set up a knife sharpening business and his clients are the rest of the people, let's say in our residential building, can you set up a competing business offering the very same service? We've had some mixed answers on that. That's the general discussion we've been having. And now we pick this up, a couple paragraphs from the top of page 22a. And the Gemara relates, there were these basket sellers who brought baskets to Bava, to Babylonia. And the townspeople came and prevented them from selling there. Right? So they didn't want... people, the local basket sellers didn't want these out-of-town basket sellers to come in and compete, let's say, for the limited demand that this town had for baskets. So these basket sellers brought baskets to Babylonia, to a town in Babylonia, and the townspeople came and prevented them from selling there. And the two parties came before Ravina for a ruling. And Ravina said to them, the basket sellers came from outside the town, and they sell to those from outside the town, i.e., to guests who are not residents of the town. In other words, if the only demand within this town was the locals, and let's say that's a limited market, and there was a local basket seller who was eking out a living selling to the other locals, then maybe they could prevent these outsiders from coming in and selling baskets there. But if the outsiders are selling to outsiders, and when does that happen? On market day. When there's a market day, then no. The market, it's known that sellers are coming in from out of town and buyers are coming in from out of town. And in that context, the locals can't exclude the outsiders from selling their wares in the market. And the Gemara comments, and this statement applies only on a market day, when people come from other towns to shop, but they may not sell their wares. These outsiders cannot sell their wares in our town on non-market days. And even with regard to market days, we say so only with regard to selling in the market. But this law does not apply to circulating around the town. They can't use the fact that there's a market in our town on that day to actually leave the market and go door to door selling baskets in the town. The outsiders can come in and sell in the marketplace on market day. The Gemara further relates, there were these wool sellers who came and brought wool to the city of Pum Nahara. And the townsfolk came and prevented them from selling it. And the two parties came before Rav Kahana for a ruling. And Rav Kahana said to them, the law, the halacha, is that they may prevent you from selling your wares. And the wool sellers said to him, we have debts to collect in the city, and we must sell our wares in the meantime to sustain ourselves until we are paid. And Rav Kahana said to them, go and sell the amount needed to sustain yourselves until you have collected your debts, and then leave. Right? And we're so accustomed to living in the modern world where traveling is really not that difficult. And we read guidebooks and we read advice columns, and we don't do this anymore. In the old days, when you went traveling, you would get traveler's checks to protect yourself from being robbed or mugged while you're on the road. But these days, everybody has a credit card. The credit card can be used anywhere. It's really not so difficult. You fly there, you fly back. In ancient times, when you had to travel on foot for days or weeks to get to your destination, and if you encountered a highwayman on the road who robbed you, then what? I mean, you were just at the mercy of the people who were there when you arrived. If you were very, very fortunate, you had a cousin who knows somebody in that town that, has heard of you and would be willing, to extend tremendous courtesy and goodwill and house you, or maybe lend you a little money to get back. It was very difficult to have liquidity, to have cash, to have money, to have what to survive from when you were on the road. So these guys had to travel to collect some debts. They were not rich people. They didn't have a bag of cash to take with them. So they needed to survive by selling some of this wool. And if you have this rule that outsiders can't sell their wool in the town, then they're really up a tree. And so Rav Kahana gave them a limited dispensation. Okay, there is a rule here, and they can prevent outside wool sellers from coming in and selling. I understand you need to survive, so you can sell enough to survive and no more than that. Now the Gemara relates that Rav Dimi of Nehardea brought dried figs on a ship to sell them. Okay, so he's going to a new location and he's being a merchant, bringing goods, that are going to be worth more at the destination than they were where he bought them, because they're not so available at the destination. So the exilarch said to Rava, go and see. If he is a Torah scholar, reserve the market for him, i.e. declare that he has the exclusive right to sell dried figs. Right? The Torah scholars are going to go out of their way to make the business successful of other Torah scholars. Obviously, they have some power and they're going to favor their own, but this is not some kind of corrupt system. This sort of favoritism does what? It enables a Torah scholar to not have to spend so much time in business, so that he can spend much more time sharing the Torah that would be the real treasure that he brought to this new location. So they're saying, just make it possible for him to sell everything that he brought. He can make the money that he needs to continue his journey, or to be comfortable. And then let's bring him to the study hall so that we can all learn from him, right? That's what's really going on here. However, we're not going to extend this courtesy to somebody who might be a Torah scholar, or somebody who calls himself a Torah scholar but is, a mediocre Torah scholar. He's saying, go check him out and see if he's a legit, superior Torah scholar, if we're going to extend this courtesy to him. So Rava said, right, so Rav Dimi of Nehardea is coming. He's the one that's coming, Rav Dimi of Nehardea. The exilarch, right, that's the head of the Jewish community in Bava, which is a part of the Persian Empire at this point. So, like Mar Zutra was the exilarch in one generation. But the exilarch says to Rava, right, so who is maybe one of the top scholars. Now, this might be when Rava's a little bit younger, but he's already recognized as one of the top scholars. The exilarch says to Rava, go and see if he is a Torah scholar, reserve the market for him. And if not, don't, right? In other words, you, Rava, go check him out. He's appointing one of his top Torah scholars to check out if this visitor is a Torah scholar at that kind of level. So Rava said to his student, Rav Adda bar Abba, go and smell his jar, right? So there's the chain of command. The exilarch says to Rava, check out this new guy. Rava's busy running his yeshiva, so Rava tells his top student, Rav Adda bar Abba, to go and check out this new guy, Rav Dimi of Nehardea. Okay, so Rav Adda bar Abba went and asked Rav Dimi a question. This is the tricky question to test what kind of Torah scholar this visitor is. So with regard to an elephant that swallowed a wicker basket and excreted it intact along with its waste, what is the law? Is the vessel still susceptible to tuma, to ritual impurity, or is it considered digested and not susceptible to impurity? In other words, this wicker basket that went through the elephant, came out the other side among the excretion, but it's still an intact wicker basket. So an intact wicker basket is a utensil. It's susceptible to tuma. But if it's considered that now that it's passed through the elephant, it's really just trash, then it is not susceptible to tuma. The fact is, it is intact. Do we say that because it passed through the elephant, it's considered like trash? What is it? So an answer was not available to Rav Dimi. In other words, he had not heard the answer to this question. And while he might have worked it out logically, he wasn't about to just say, well, I would say, and then give his logical response, because that might be wrong. So he didn't have the answer available to him. Where am I? An answer was not available to Rav Dimi. So Rav Dimi said to Rav Adda bar Abba, is the master Rava? Meaning, is the master, meaning you. He's calling, they always speak about, Torah scholars speak to each other in the third person. So referring to the guy who's quizzing him, he says, is the master Rava? In other words, are you Rava? He's heard of Rava, but he's never met Rava in person. He's being tested in such a difficult way. Rava, in fact, is the one who sent the question, but this is Rava's student. So he's asking him, are you Rava? Is the master Rava? Meaning, are you Rava, as you have asked me such a difficult question? And Rav Adda bar Abba struck him on his shoe in a disparaging way and said to him, well, there is a great difference between me and Rava, but I am perforce your teacher, and Rava is your teacher's teacher. Like, you think I asked you such a difficult question? You think I'm an elevated scholar? I'm just Rava's student, but you couldn't even answer the question that I put to you. And you're asking me if I'm Rava. Rava's much greater than I, but you couldn't even answer the question of Rava's student. Now, based on this exchange, Rav Adda bar Abba decided that Rav Dimi was not a great scholar, and therefore he did not reserve the market for him. And in the end, Rav Dimi lost his dried figs as he was not able to sell them, and they rotted. Rav Dimi was angry about this, and he came before Rav Yosef to complain. and said to him, the master should see what they did to me, right? Now he's talking to Rav Yosef and calling him the master, right? The master is how they refer to a fellow Torah scholar. So the master should see what they did to me. And Rav Dimi told his story. So Rav Yosef said to him, he who did not delay retribution for the humiliation of the king of Edom should not delay his response, meaning God's response to your humiliation, but should punish whoever distressed you. As it is written, quote, so says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Moab, indeed for 4 I will not reverse for him, because he burned the bones of the king of Edom into lime. So this is from Amos 2:1. The point is, if God took retribution for somebody who's not even of our people because he was humiliated, how much more, now that a Torah scholar has been humiliated, should the one who humiliated you, God will exact punishment from him. Very strong words from Rav Yosef, based on the story that Rav Dimi related to him. Now, the Gemara reports that Rav Adda bar Abba, right, the student of Rava who quizzed Rav Dimi, the Gemara reports that Rav Adda bar Abba died. Rav Yosef said. In other words, now maybe Rav Yosef didn't get the whole story, he didn't really know exactly who he was talking about when he uttered this curse, and now Rav Yosef regrets it. And he says, I punished him, meaning my words caused him to die. Meaning I am to blame for his death. Why? Because I cursed him. Rav Dimi from Nehardea, the one who was involved in the incident, said, I punished him, right? I am to blame, as he caused my loss of dried figs. I mean, he caused me a loss. I was incensed. I reported what happened. This curse came. It was my fault. Abaye said, who wasn't even involved in this story, Abaye said, I punished him. I am to blame. He was punished on my account because he did not exhibit the proper respect for me in some other incident. As Rav Adda bar Abba said to the sages, instead of gnawing the bones in the school of Abaye, you would do better to eat fatty meat in the school of Rava. I.e., it is preferable to study with Rava than with Abaye. Right? And, I'm sure that word that Rav Adda bar Abba had said that, Rava is better than Abaye, got back to Abaye, and Abaye didn't like it. And Rava said, I punished him, right? It's my fault. As when he would go to the butcher to buy a piece of meat, he would say to the butchers, I will take meat before Rava's servant, as I am greater than he is. Now, he wasn't saying, this is obviously he's Rava's student, so he's not saying that I'm greater than Rava, he's saying that I'm greater than Rava's servant. But he shouldn't have put himself ahead of the Rava's servant, because even though the servant was a slave, and Rav Adda bar Abba is a Torah scholar, that slave at the butcher shop is there to shop for Rava, and you let the slave go first since he's shopping for Rava, right? And when Rav Adda bar Abba didn't, use the correct kind of respect in that situation, maybe it got back to Rava. Maybe Rava said, who does that guy think he is? And in all these cases, Rav Adda bar Abba obviously was not so tactful, and he managed to anger a whole bunch of different Torah scholars, and, unclear who exactly he angered and cursed him and, maybe caused him to have a premature death. And, perhaps somebody who doesn't honor others in the proper way, even though he's a great Torah scholar, he wasn't honoring others in maybe the way that he should have, ended up having this outcome. Hard to say exactly what happened, but that's how it's recorded. Now, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, another one saying, I punished him, meaning I am to blame. He was punished because of me. As Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was the head of the Kala lectures. These are the gatherings for Torah study during Elul and Adar, the months of Elul and Adar. And Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak would teach the students immediately following the lesson taught by the head of the academy. Says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, every day before every day before he went in for the Kala lecture, he reviewed his lecture with Rav Adda bar Abba. And then he would enter the study hall for the Kala lecture. right? So this is not an insult issue. It's that Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak was accustomed to reviewing the lecture he was about to deliver with Rav Adda bar Abba before he went out and delivered it to this large throng of people. And Rav Adda bar Abba was utterly reliable. That's why he relied on him, right? He was not only reliable to give good feedback, but he was reliable to be there to give the feedback. And on that day, Rav Papa and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, seized Rav Adda bar Abba because they had not been present at the conclusion of Rava's lecture, and they said to him, "Tell us how Rava stated these laws of the animal tithe." And Rav Adda bar Abba said to them, "Well, Rava said this and Rava said that." And meanwhile, it grew late for Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, and Rav Adda bar Abba had not yet arrived. Right? He didn't do anything himself. It wasn't like he was negligent. He was, stopped to have a drink somewhere. It's that other Torah scholars kind of pinned him and said, "Tell us what was said yesterday." And he's explaining it to them. And meanwhile, he becomes late to go, give this feedback with Rav Nachman that Rav Nachman really wants. So the sages, meanwhile, Rav Nachman doesn't want to go out and give his lecture until he's had a chance to review it with Rav Adda bar Abba. And at that point, the sages said to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, "Let's go. The time has come for the lecture. You're late. Arise and teach us, as it is getting late." Why does the master sit and wait? And Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said to them, "I am sitting and waiting for the beer, B-I-E-R, of Rav Adda bar Abba, who has presumably died." Meaning, if he's late, it must be because he's dead. And if he's dead, I'm waiting to pay my respects. Meanwhile, a rumor emerged that Rav Adda bar Abba had indeed died. And the Gemara comments, and so too it is reasonable to conclude that it was Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak who punished him. In other words, he died as a result of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's statement, as the unfortunate event occurred just as he announced that Rav Adda bar Abba's beer was on its way. He was saying, well, if he's not here, it must be because he's dead. And they're saying, well, he got it right, but was his statement what caused him to die? I mean, I don't think you would say that. It says that, but I think they're speaking a little bit hyperbolically here. That all these people, in other words, in terms of whose emotional, whose words, had something to do with Rav Adda bar Abba meeting an untimely end. It's almost like, whose words didn't in this long list of sages. At any rate, he met an untimely end. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3. Now, Mishnah number 4, one whose wall was close. And by the way, what do I know? I don't want to besmirch the name of Rav Adda bar Abba. I'm just reporting what it says here. And it may well be that he was fully innocent in all of these cases, and it was just a really unfortunate set of circumstances. But decide what you will. Okay, Mishnah number 4. One whose wall was close to the wall of another may not build another wall close to the neighbor's wall unless he distances it 4 cubits from the wall of the neighbor. And one who desires to build a wall opposite the windows of a neighbor's house must distance the wall 4 cubits from the windows, whether above, below, or opposite. Okay, so here we're talking about two issues. The second one is privacy. That you can't, have your wall next to your neighbor's window in such a way that you can peer over the wall into your neighbor's window. You have to, in other words, you have to respect the neighbor's privacy. And the first part of this Mishnah is basically that if your neighbor has a wall and you're going to build a wall next to his wall, you can't build the two walls very close together because that's going to create a structural integrity problem. As we'll see, if the ground is stable, it's a city that's been settled for 60 years, maybe even has stone streets that these walls are built on, then the walls can be closer together. But if the ground is, just kind of dirt that hasn't been walked on, hasn't been trodden, hasn't been tamped down a bunch of times, then having these two walls too close together, one wall might fall, and if it's too close to the other wall, it'll knock that wall over, and so you need to have this setback. That's Mishnah number 4. Now the Gemara comments, before addressing the construction of the second wall, one could ask, and with regard to the first man, how did he place his wall close to his neighbor's wall in the first place? In other words, the Mishnah didn't say, if your neighbor has a wall, don't build your wall closer than 4 cubits. Instead, it says, if you have a wall near your neighbor's wall and you're going to build another wall, it shouldn't be less than 4 cubits from the neighbor's wall. So what are we talking about? There's already a wall and you're going to build a second wall on your own property? Is it that your wall fell down and now you're going to replace it? And you might have thought you could replace it closer, but you can't. But if your wall is already closer than 4 cubits to the neighbor's wall, well, how did that happen if you're not allowed to build a wall closer than 4 cubits? That's what the Gemara is asking. And with regard to the first man, how did he place his wall close to the neighbor's wall? So Rav Yehuda said that this is what the Tana is saying. Now we're on page 22b. One who comes to place a wall close to his neighbor's wall may place that wall close to the neighbor's wall only if he distances his wall 4 cubits from the existing wall. So accordingly, the Mishnah is discussing one constructing a wall close to his neighbor's wall for the first time. We are talking about the first man, right? There was only the neighbor's wall, and now you're going to build a wall. And the odd wording of the Mishnah, it simply means, no, you're coming to build a wall, and it's going to end up near your neighbor's wall, and it can't be nearer than 4 cubits. Rava objects to this explanation. But the Mishnah wasn't written that way. The Mishnah teaches one whose wall was near the wall of another, which indicates that there had already been a wall there, right? Your neighbor has a wall and you have a wall. So rather, Rava said that this is what the Mishnah is teaching. In a case of one whose wall was near the wall of another at a distance of 4 cubits and his wall fell down, he may not place the replacement wall close to his neighbor's wall unless he distances that wall 4 cubits from it. The replacement can't be less than 4 cubits from the wall. And what is the reason that this distance must be observed? And the reason is that walking here between the walls benefits there, i.e. the ground is strengthened by people walking on the land in the area between the walls. You know, it's funny that we're learning this today because just this morning, I was talking to somebody who, had a pool, an old pool that was there when he bought the property, and he didn't want a pool. He didn't want to rebuild this old pool that wasn't going to work for him, and so he's just filling in the pool. Now, you might have thought that, well, how do you get rid of a pool, you know? It's much easier than creating a pool. You just fill it with dirt. You don't have to smash up the walls. You just fill it with dirt. So you might have thought that they just kind of bring in a dump truck and fill it with dirt up to the top level of the pool. And that is not what they do. What they do is they, bring in like a foot of dirt, and then they have one of those machines that's like, right? And they tamp it down. Now, that's a machine they didn't have in ancient times. What they relied on is, hundreds or thousands of people to walk over it. Then it's compressed enough, and then you would bring in another layer of dirt, right? But when they fill in this pool, they put in a foot of dirt at a time and then really crush it, make it dense, and then bring in the next layer. And that way, the top layer will not sink if they didn't, and then you could have a lawn on top of it. But if they didn't do that, then over time, when it rains, etc., you develop a kind of a sinkhole where the pool was. And so you get the idea that, if you're just building a wall over dirt, before you build another wall near it, you need that dirt to be tamped down. And one way to do that is just people walking by. So Rav says they taught that one must leave a space of 4 cubits between his wall. Rav taught that one must leave a space of 4 cubits between his wall and that of his neighbor, only if he builds it alongside the wall of his neighbor's garden, where people do not usually walk due to the seeds that are there. But with regard to the wall of a courtyard where people do walk, if he comes to place his wall close by, he may place it close by. By contrast, Rabbi Oshaya says, with regard to both the wall of a garden and the wall of a courtyard, if one comes to place his wall close by, he may not do so. He may not place it close by. Right? In other words, one of them distinguishes between a courtyard and a garden because the ground is already tamped down in a courtyard. But Rabbi Shaya isn't buying it. He says it's not going to be tamped down enough. These walls need to be separated by 4 cubits. Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina said, and the two Amoraim do not disagree, as they are referring to different cases. This statement of Rav is referring to an old city whose ground is well trodden and stable. And that statement of Rabbi Shai is referring to a new city, where even the wall of a courtyard requires walking on its adjacent ground in order to strengthen it. Now, with regard to the claim that the law of the Mishnah is due to the need for space for people to walk on the ground between the walls, the Gemara asks, but we learned in the Mishnah, and one who desires to build a wall opposite the windows of a neighbor's house must distance the wall 4 cubits from the windows, whether above, below, or opposite. Now, this is about privacy. And it is taught in a baraisa with regard to this ruling concerning the requirement of a distance above. The wall must be high enough so that one cannot peer into the window and see into the window of his neighbor. Concerning the requirement of a distance below, the wall must be so low that he will not be able to stand on top of it and see into the window. And concerning the requirement of a distance opposite, one must distance the wall from the windows so that it will not darken his neighbor's house by blocking the light that enters the house through the window. Now the Gemara analyzes this statement. The reason that distance is required opposite the window is so that he will not darken his neighbor's house by blocking the light that enters the house through that window. But it is not due to the fact that walking will strengthen the ground. So why are we talking about walking strengthening the ground with respect to 4 cubit setback when that's more about light coming through a window? But that's only the second part of the Mishnah. The first part was simply about walls, distance to walls, not walls to windows. But let's see what the Gemara says. So the Gemara answers with, what are we dealing here? We are dealing with a wall that is positioned to the side, i.e. perpendicular to the wall with the window in it, and therefore it blocks the light from entering the house through the window, but does not prevent walking along the length of the neighbor's wall. So the Gemara asks, and how far must one distance his wall if it is perpendicular to the other wall? So Yeva, the father-in-law of Ashan bar Nidbach, says in the name of Rav, as much as the full width of the window. And the Gemara asks, but why is this sufficient? Can he still peer into the window if he is that close? And Rav Zeved says this is referring to one who slopes his wall, i.e. he fashions an incline on the upper surface of the wall so that he will not be able to stand on top of it and look through the window. So, big safeguards, big sort of planning going into the idea that we're going to do everything we need to do to prevent peeping toms, to prevent people from looking into the windows or doorways or rooftops or courtyards of other people. And the Gemara asks, but didn't we learn in the Mishnah that one must keep the wall 4 cubits away from the window? And the Gemara answers, this is not difficult. Here he builds the wall on one side of the window, whereas there in the Mishnah he builds the walls on 2 sides of the window. In the latter case, if he builds the walls any closer, he will block the light from entering the house through the window, even if they are perpendicular. Right? So, you can... it's obvious if you build a wall parallel to the window of your neighbor that you're going to block his light. But even if you build it perpendicular, you can see that if it's tall and it has an angle like that, especially if you're south of his window, you're going to block a lot of light. Now the Gemara suggests, come in here a further difficulty from the Mishnah below with regard to the claim that the requisite gap between the walls is for the purpose of walking, right? That we want to keep a distance where people can walk in order to stabilize the loose ground. As the Mishnah teaches, and one must distance his wall 4 cubits from a roof gutter so that his neighbor can lean a ladder in the empty space to clean and repair the gutter. So when you say 4 cubits, that's like 6 feet. Now we're saying, no, the 6 feet, it's not for privacy and it's not to stabilize the ground. It's that, you need this alleyway for maintenance on the home. And if the houses are built right up against each other, these walls are right up against each other, you're going to prevent people from doing the kind of maintenance that they need to do, for example, cleaning out gutters. Now the Gemara analyzes this statement. The reason this distance is required is due to the fact that it will be able to lean a ladder, but it is not due to the fact that walking will strengthen the ground. So the Gemara answers with, what are we dealing here? We are dealing with a sloping roof gutter, which protrudes beyond the boundary of the wall. As in this case, if the reason for distancing the wall is due to walking, one can walk back and forth beneath it. Nevertheless, a distance of 4 cubits from the roof gutter is required so that repairs can be performed. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 4. Now, Mishnah number 5. One must distance his ladder 4 cubits from a neighbor's dovecote so that a mongoose will not be able to jump from the ladder to the dovecote and devour the birds. And one must distance his wall 4 cubits from a roof gutter so that the neighbor can lean a ladder in the empty space to clean and repair the gutter. That's the Mishnah we just read a moment ago. Now, the Gemara. Let us say that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei. As if it were in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei, doesn't he say, with regard to planting a tree next to a neighbor's cistern, this one digs within his land and that one plants within his land, and neither individual need consider what is happening in the property of the other. Now remember, this is one of those few cases where Rabbi Yosei isn't right? And the other sages overruled Rabbi Yosei, because we saw, right? It's not that you can do if you're on your property and I'm on my property, either of us can do whatever we want on our property, because there are certain activities that you do on your property that very much impact the quiet enjoyment of your neighbor's property. And we started this in chapter 2 by talking about if he has a pit in his backyard that he's using, as a water cistern, and you want to put a cistern in your backyard, well, you can't put your cistern right up against his cistern, because now the walls, the in-between wall, the wall between the two cisterns will be too weak, and both cisterns might end up collapsing, right? So you can't just do whatever you want on your property. And even Rabbi Yosei would limit his ruling. But what about this? That on your property, you have a dovecote, right? You have pigeons, you have doves that you are keeping in this dovecote. And I have a ladder that I use to access my roof. But if my ladder that I use to get to my roof is too close to your dovecote, now animals like mongooses and ferrets and other little predators could use my ladder to get into your dovecote, and then all your doves are going to get eaten by the mongoose. So would Rabbi Yosei really permit that, or would he say, well, if now I need that ladder from my roof? If your dovecote is too close to my ladder, well, too bad. You should move your dovecote, not force me to put my ladder somewhere else. So the Gemara answers, you may even say that the Mishnah follows the opinion of Rabbi Yosei, as did Rav Ashi say when we were studying in the study hall of Rav Kahana. He would say to us that Rabbi Yosei concedes with regard to his arrows, i.e., he concedes that one must distance himself if his actions will cause damage to his neighbor. So here too, sometimes when he places the ladder, the mongoose might be sitting in a hole and will immediately jump up and climb the ladder to the dovecote. And the Gemara challenges, but that is indirect damage, as he is not the immediate cause. It's not that the ladder fell and damaged the dovecote. It's that putting the ladder there enabled the mongoose to get up. But you can't call that direct damage, even if the mongoose jumps up on the ladder as soon as the ladder is placed there. It's still not direct. And Rav Tovi Bar Matana said, that is to say, that it is prohibited to cause even indirect damage, right? They're saying, right, even indirect damage you can't do. So the Gemara relates, Rav Yosef had certain small palm trees called taleh, and now we're getting a head start on tomorrow. We're on page 23a. So Rav Yosef had certain small palm trees, and bloodletters would come and sit beneath them and perform their work there. And crows would come, eat the blood, and fly up to the palm trees and damage the dates. And so this is really like that, that golf joke, right? Where Moses is playing with God, and Moses, slices the ball off into the water, and then he walks up and he parts the water, and then he hits his ball up onto the green and makes birdie. God, if you could say such a thing, tees off, the ball goes in the water. A fish swallows the ball, swims near the surface. An eagle swoops down, grabs the fish in its talons, is flying off with it. The fish coughs up the ball. It lands in a tree, bounces off a branch, falls on the green, and rolls in the hole for a hole-in-one. And Moses turns to God and says, listen, are we going to screw around or are we going to play golf? Right? So this kind of, chain of causation. Right? So here, Rav Yosef had these small palm trees, right? So it's not like God is orchestrating a chain of events. I mean, God supervises everything in the world, but here the chain of events is the bloodletters come, right? So this is like, they're not doctors exactly, but people in the ancient world thought that for various maladies, that they would benefit from just releasing some blood, and the bloodletters perform that service. They would let the blood spill on the floor. The crows would come and eat the blood. They would fly up to the palm trees and they would damage the dates that were Rav Yosef's dates. So Rav Yosef said to the bloodletters, remove these crowing birds from here. In other words, go do your business elsewhere so that the blood will be spilled somewhere else, so that the crows will go there and not then come and fly into my trees and damage my dates. So Abaye said to him, but this is totally indirect action. As the bloodletters themselves, they're not damaging the dates. You can't say that the bloodletters are damaging the dates. They're just spilling blood on the ground, and it's not your ground. So you can't prevent them. Rav Yosef said to Abaye that Rav Tovi Bar Matana said as follows. That is to say that it is prohibited to cause even indirect damage. It's not that this is indirect damage and therefore it's allowed. This is indirect damage, and even that is prohibited. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, but they have established and acquired privilege to use that particular spot for their work. The bloodletters have been coming here to perform this service for the townspeople in that spot for many years, before you came here and planted your date palms, Rav Yosef. This is what Abaye is saying. They have a privilege. They have a precedent here. And Rav Yosef replied, doesn't Rav Nachman say that Rabba Bar Abba says there is no acquired privilege of use in cases of damage, i.e., an established situation may not be allowed to continue in the event that damage results? Abaye inquired further, but wasn't it stated with regard to that statement of Rav Nachman that Rav Mari said it is referring specifically to smoke? And Rav Zevit said it is referring to a bathroom. In other words, this principle that we're not going to allow a precedent to continue if it's causing damage, this was stated specifically in the context of damage caused by these kinds of substances. Either smoke that's coming into someone's house, or, the odors and the poisonous odors of a latrine, right, of an outhouse. And Rav Yosef said to him, well, for me, as I am sensitive, these are like smoke and a bathroom to me, which is why I have the right to demand that the bloodletters leave. Now, it's interesting because the story was told that it's the dates were being damaged. With that's a commercial damage. Why is Rav Yosef saying I am sensitive? Right? It must be that it wasn't just the damage to his dates. It was that the blood, first of all, that is maybe disgusting. But second, maybe the crows, eating that blood and then resting in Rav Yosef's palms and then crowing are triggering him, who's possibly too sensitive to the sound of the crows. But, let's say that he really has a serious condition that is triggered, and he's saying, look, I will not be able to learn or teach Torah. These crows are completely upsetting to me. I have a particular sensitivity. These bloodletters can apply their business elsewhere. It's not going to be so difficult for them. Once the townspeople hear the bloodletters are no longer here, they're 2 blocks away, they can walk 2 blocks. It's not that big a deal. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 5. Mishnah 6 here in chapter 2. One must distance a dovecote 50 cubits from the city to prevent doves from eating seeds in the town. And a person should not establish a dovecote within his own property unless he has 50 cubits in each direction between the dovecote and the edge of his property. Right, so before we were talking about that, your ladder might enable a mongoose to climb into your neighbor's dovecote and you would damage his dovecote. Now we're saying that the doves in the dovecote themselves can cause different types of damage to their neighbors. Now you can see why Bava Basra is such an interesting tractate that is all about very real world examples of how people come, to impact their neighbors in various negative ways, and the kind of edicts that the sages are going to issue, to promote quiet enjoyment of one's property without being damaged by his neighbors, right? So now we're talking about the damage that doves can do. So you have to distance your dovecotes 50 cubits from the city to prevent these doves from eating seeds in the town. And a person should not establish a dovecote within his own property unless he has 50 cubits in each direction between the dovecote and the edge of his property. At 50 cubits, 75 feet. It's not a small property if you're talking about something in a city. Rabbi Yehuda says that one must have surrounding the dovecote the area required for sowing, S-O-W-I-N-G, 4 core of seed on each side, which generally extends as far as a dove flies in a single flight. And if one bought the dovecote with the land, he has acquired the privilege of its use, even if it has surrounding it only the area required for sowing a quarter kav of seed, which is a base rova, around it, and he need not remove it from there. Now, already you should be thinking, wait a minute, doves can fly a long way. What's 75 feet going to do? Why is that a meaningful distance from your neighbor, from the city? Doves fly much farther than that, right? They fly miles and miles. So what does this setback really accomplish? Well, let's keep reading. So the Gemara asks, must one distance a dovecote only 50 cubits from the city and no more? Is that as far as one can expect a dove to fly? And the Gemara raises a contradiction from a Mishna in tractate Bava, page 79b. One may spread out traps, known as neshavin, for doves only if this was performed at a distance of at least 30 ris, or 4 mil, which is about 4 miles. And this is 8,000 cubits from any settled area to avoid catching birds that belong to another. So apparently doves fly a distance of 4 miles easily, whereas the Mishnah here states 50 cubits. And Abaye said doves do fly great distances, which is why one must avoid catching other people's birds by keeping traps at least 4 miles away from settled areas. But as they eat along their way, their stomachs are filled after a distance of 50 cubits, at which point they will do no more damage to seeds. Isn't that interesting? Like, just in terms of what they need to go eat, they don't really go that far. About 75 feet away from their dovecote, it's as far as they need to go to eat, as long as there is food within that area. Now the Gemara asks, and do they fly only 30 ris, which is to say about 4 miles, and no more? But isn't it Torah b'Oraisa? And in a settled area, one may not spread out a trap, even if the area under his control extends as far as 100 mil, like 100 miles in each direction. And Rav Yosef says the Baraisa is referring to a settled area of vineyards, i.e. a contiguous region of vineyards and gardens. In that case, the doves pass from place to place even over a greater distance. Now Rava said the Baraisa is referring to a settled area of dovecotes, i.e. where many dovecotes are distributed. And the Gemara asks, and according to Rava, let the Tana derive that one may not establish a new dovecote there due to the other dovecotes themselves, as he will trap doves belonging to other people. And the Gemara answers, if you wish, say that this is referring to his own dovecotes, and if you wish, say it is referring to the dovecotes of other nations, whose property one is not obligated to protect from harm, and if you wish, say it is referring to ownerless dovecotes. New subject, Rabbi Yehuda says that one must have, surrounding the dovecote, the area required for sowing 4 core of seed, right? In other words, there's a certain size field. You need a large enough field, and the dovecote goes right in the middle of this field that's large enough to have this spread of land on all sides of the dovecote, minimum spread of land. And if one bought the dovecote with the land, well, then he has acquired the privilege of its use. He didn't install the dovecote there. It was there when he bought it. Apparently, the neighbors didn't complain when the previous owner had it. So now the new owner can just keep the dovecote on the land, even if there's not enough field surrounding the dovecote. And Rav Papa said, and some say it was Rav Zevid, that is to say that a court issues a claim on behalf of a buyer and issues a claim on behalf of an heir. one who inherits. And this is referring to the law of taking possession, meaning if one has been physically in possession of an item for a period of time, generally 3 years, this serves as proof that he is in fact the legal owner. And this possession must be accompanied by a claim of how one acquired the item. He cannot simply state that no one protested his possessing the item for 3 years. He had to have acquired it legally at the outset, not be a squatter. And Rav Papa is saying that the court will lodge a claim on behalf of a buyer or an heir that they have acquired the item from someone who was the owner, just as here the court assumes that the previous owner of the dovecote came to an agreement with his neighbors that he may use it, as I said before. So the Gemara asks, why is it necessary for Rav Papa to state this law? We already learned this with regard to an heir on page 41a. In the case of land that comes as an inheritance, one is not required to make a claim as to how the land came into his benefactor's possession when one's ownership of the land is challenged. Right? One who inherits, he just has to explain that he inherited. He doesn't have to prove how his father originally acquired the land. And the Gemara answers, it was necessary for him to state this law with regard to a buyer. And the Gemara asks, as opposed to an heir. So the Gemara asks, with regard to a buyer as well. We learn this in a Mishna on page 60a. If one bought a courtyard in which there are projections and balconies extending into the public domain, the courtyard retains its presumptive status, i.e. the owner has the acquired privilege of their use and the court does not demand their removal. In other words, you bought an apartment, or you bought a building that has a terrace that extends out over the neighbor's property, right? So it's in the airspace of the neighbor's property. Now, and you bought this property, the terrace, the balcony was already there. So how did the previous owner get the right to build that balcony over the airspace of the neighbor's property? The new owner doesn't know. But he doesn't have to prove that it was originally, done in a kosher manner, that the guy paid for that right and the neighbor agreed. Because, as long as that balcony's been there for 3 years, and certainly if the new owner has had it for 3 years before anyone complains, well, then they had their chance to complain, and now he enjoys this presumptive right. And the Gemara answers, wait a minute. Yeah, exactly. So now the Gemara answers to this, it was necessary for the Tana, in other words, why this is being brought as a proof about the dovecote, that if the dovecote is supposed to have a certain size field around it, and the field is smaller, and the new owner of the land, he didn't build a dovecote, but no one complained until 3 years later, or say 4 years later, so he's not going to have to move his dovecote. He didn't originally install it on too small a property. The previous owner did. No one complained, so now he can keep it there. He has acquired that right. Now the Gemara answers, it was necessary for the Tana of the Mishna. So in other words, didn't we already learn the same law for the dovecote that we now just learned for the balcony extending, the new owner of a house that has a balcony extending over the neighbor's property? Isn't that teaching the same principle? And the Gemara answers, it was necessary for the Tana of the Mishnah to state this law in both cases. As if he had taught us this only there in that Mishnah, one might have said that it applies specifically with regard to a protrusion or balcony that extends into the public domain. As one can say that perhaps it is a case where the seller had drawn back into his own land before adding the projection and balconies, and they in fact do not extend into the public thoroughfare. Alternatively, perhaps the public waived their right to him and allowed him to place them over the common areas, otherwise they would have protested. But here, where he causes damage to private individuals, the dovecote, the doves are going to fly out and eat seeds of the neighbor. But in a case of the damage, wait a minute. But here, where he causes damage to private individuals, one might have thought that the buyer does not have a privilege of use, and therefore the Mishnah teaches us otherwise. And if he had taught this only in the Mishnah here, one might have said that the party potentially suffering damage is an individual. The owner of the dovecote appeased his neighbor by paying him to permit him to construct it. Alternatively, the neighbor might have waived his right to him. But in a case where damage is caused to the public, so I was wrong, it's not a balcony extending over the neighbor's property, it's a balcony extending into the public domain, and who gave him the right to do that? But in a case where the damage is caused to the public, one might argue, whom did he appease and whom yielded to him? Consequently, one might say that the purchaser does not retain the privilege of use. Therefore, it is necessary for the Tana to teach the law in this case as well, that if he built that balcony out into the public and no one complained for 3 years, but then he gets that right to keep using it, and so does the guy who purchases the house from him. Now, the Mishnah teaches that if one bought the dovecote with the land, he has acquired the privilege of use. And the Gemara asks, but doesn't Rav Nachman say that Rava bar Avu says there is no acquired privilege for use? There is no acquired privilege of use for cases of damage. I'm very close to done. So I didn't give you a warning. Questions or comments, please get them in now. But doesn't Rav Nachman say that Rava bar Avu says there is no acquired privilege for use? Oh gosh, I keep reading this wrong. But doesn't Rav Nachman say that Rava bar Avu says there is no acquired privilege of use for cases of damage? Right? You can't acquire this privilege of use if the use is damaging to someone else. Doesn't matter how long it's been done. The fact is, someone can complain, I'm being damaged, and then, this privilege evaporates. So why should he retain his acquired privilege of use when his doves are causing damage to his neighbor? And Rav Mari says Rav Nachman's statement is referring specifically to smoke, which causes serious damage. And that is why it overrides an acquired privilege. And Rav Zevid said it is referring to a bathroom whose odor is particularly strong, right? You can't build your outhouse, with its pit of foul odor right next to your, neighbor's residence, and you could see why immediately. But, having your dovecote 40 cubits from your neighbor's property, how much damage is that really going to cause? So there you can acquire the privilege, whereas for smoke or bathroom odors, you don't. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 6. And with God's help, we'll pick this up tomorrow with Mishnah number 7. We're actually going to be at the top of page 23b, and we should be able to do a double daf tomorrow and get ourselves caught up. Okay. A few questions. Sharon, sounds like Rav Adda bar Abba was not a particularly kind person if there is such a litany of rabbis who he had so many negative interactions with. Right, that seems to be what's going on there, but I just hesitate to speak disparagingly of any sage, even one who's been gone a couple thousand years, unless they say it themselves, and you do see that the other sages are blaming themselves, so it's not like, they had a negative interaction with him, they might have become angry with him, but they regret that he's gone. And perhaps so should we. Elvis says, I'm always amazed at not only the ethical aspects of all these laws, but also the practical value and applications. When you remarked about allowing your neighbor to enjoy the serenity and quietness of their property, I abide by this by never mowing my lawn before 10 a.m. Beautiful. And man, we live in a, kind of the middle of LA. There are houses here, but the lots are quite small, but there's like little yards. And gardeners are all over the neighborhood with the leaf blowers. And oh my gosh, those leaf blowers, they're so loud. The lawnmowers too, but somehow the leaf blowers are worse. And, people certainly don't start too early in the morning, but they're not as polite as you, Elvis. It's not 10 a.m. It's like 7:30 a.m. is the best you can hope for. Sometimes even on Sunday or Saturday. But the worst for me is sometimes, we're making videos here and, perfect example, right? I'm being damaged if my neighbor has his gardener's leaf blower going at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but how can I complain? I mean, he has a right to have his, leaves blown at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I have a particular sensitivity that I would like, to have some quiet in my yard so that I could record a video, for our Accidental Talmudist platform. But that's my own particular need, right? I'm, in that sense, overly sensitive. On the other hand, if they were starting with the leaf blowers at 6 a.m. every day, you bet that the neighbors, would be up in arms. Tom, turning inheritance into a, wait for it, grandfather clause. Very good. Good. Turning an inheritance into a grandfather clause. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Friday, at the regular Friday time of noon Pacific. Have a good night.